Hello, hello, Ardalan. Nice to meet you. Nice to
Nice.
see you again, actually.
Nice to meet you, Dan.
Somebody told me that never say meet you because you never remember when you actually met people before and so on. And this is not our first time talking, but it's lovely to see you again. And is it fair to say that you're an expert on the history and the future of democracy?
Kind of. I studied it a long time ago. And then recent years, I did it by my own. I have to say, don't do it professionally because I have other jobs to do, but as many people nowadays, I'm highly interested in how to develop things further, how to improve democracy and things like that. And I do it with a high intensity. So it's a kind of very intensive hobby of mine
Yeah.
right now.
And and you're not just looking forward, you're looking backward. You're basically saying, let's look at the origin of democracy. Let's look at our history, what we did before, we as humanity, not you and I, and then basically say, are there lessons in there for what we should move forward? So let's maybe start with looking back.
Okay.
And how did democracy look in ancient times?
If you allow, I even want to step one back before. How does it come before we talk about how it looked like when the original version of democracy in the ancient times? How did it come that there was democracy at all? Because this is a really
Why?
interesting question. Why
Yeah,
did the
why?
Greeks? Why did they invent democracy? Because the first real surprise is it were aristocrats that invented democracy. And the key question: why should aristocrats do such a strange thing as to invent democracy? And to put it short, it was the invention in reaction to a deep crisis of the society. Then we talk about the 7th and 6th century before Christ, a long time before philosophy was invented with Plato and Aristotle. Names you could know probably that are related to the time is the name of Solon and Cleisthenes. I don't know how it's spelled in English correctly, but these are names one could know. And there was a deep crisis. Parts of the citizenry got very poor and were dragged into kind of slavery, because there was no concept as debts. If you had debts, you had to work for it. So
That's right.
many free people.
You couldn't borrow. You couldn't
Yeah,
borrow.
yeah,
You
yeah.
basically had to.
They hadn't this system. And so it was a deep crisis, and this crisis was round about 100 years. So it was really tough times. There
So
was a lot of,
there was a class war, so to say, a lot of uneasiness in
yes, and
society, and it lasted for a while, and then they came
yeah,
up with an approach.
yeah, they came up with an approach through many, many steps, you have to say. There was even a tyrant phase, which they went through and they learned from it. So, and I was surprised because I didn't expect it about the structural similarities to our times. So it's a long time ago. It's a very different society, very different circumstances. And I really was surprised when I looked it up again and studied it, as many on the many similarities to our times. So structurally, there are many similarities to the problems we face today. And this is why the original democracy is really interesting for us, because it really solves many problems they had before, they went
Yeah.
through before.
So there was a large Gini coefficient, income inequality. What else was similar to our times?
There's the big polarization, I would say. It was not exactly the same because the Greek did one thing better than we do. They hadn't the idea of the institutionalization of political parties. They were conscious that political parties are a problem, not a solution. And so to solve this, so kind of the thing was political parties just raised. They come to raise. It's natural that political parties come to existence. But this was the problem, and the political parties were part of the fighting. So they always had fighting. We would call it civil war. The Greeks would name it stasis. This is the Greek term for it. And stasis is very interesting because it means civil war and blockade, nothing going further at the same time. So this is quite similar. So we have nowadays in many countries the situation.
Wars and income inequality, and then after lots of trials, they come up with democracy. And how is the democracy? What does it look like?
So the key thing is that there was common sense about that elections are not the key process of democracy as we think. And if you look back, this really is an invention of our modern times. Until the end of the 18th history, it was really common sense that elections are the typical for aristocracies. And the process of democracy is sortition, or to draw lots. Or I don't know how you call it in English.
Yeah.
I know it as sortition.
Lottery. Yeah.
Lottery, of course, lottery. And this was the key thing is that it involved all the citizens actively. So there was the key learning was, if you want to have peace in the polis, we would say in the state, you need all the citizens to have as politically active subjects of the process, not only as consumers or objects of politics. And this was the key learning, and the process sortition was.
Maybe to be clear, let's explain what it is to mean lottery. For example, when it comes to court, it's not as if you have judges and you have people who are accused, but every day you show up and you have a drawing, and you draw who is going to be the judge today.
Yeah, this was a part. So the courts. They had many of them were very important, but they also had the so-called boulé. It was a kind of parliament of 500 people, and they were also drawn by lottery. And what they had is a circulation of power among the citizens, a constant circulation of power, because what they didn't want to have is kind of privilege in the power, because what they had experienced is that if you have privilege in politics, you get fighting, and they wanted to stop the fighting. So, but it's very important for us today. We always think democracy is a system to avoid tyranny, and this is true. But it wasn't the key problem. The key problem was the fighting. The key problem was stasis, and they had very much clarity about that tyranny is a secondary phenomenon that raises from stasis from the fighting of the parties. So if you have fighting of the parties, you will get someday a tyrant, because the citizens get tired of the fighting, and then they are, bring us a tyrant, he will bring peace. So the fighting stops. So if the people are tired of the fighting of the aristocrats, they choose a tyrant instead. And this was the experience they made. And as they were not very fond of tyranny, but they weren't very fond of fighting of the parties either, so they had a system that stopped both of the phenomena at the same time. But the key problem was stasis. And the interesting thing for us today, just to let it finish, is that we institutionalized stasis in our modern times, and we say, it's good when the parties fight, it's concurrence, it's good for us. But now we face some problems with the system all over the world where such systems exist. They get to an end. They get to systemic problems. You can watch this all over.
Let's think for a second about this lottery thing, because it's so important, and we kind of make it very quickly. So let's think about in a court case, for example, and then we'll move to the ruling body. In the court case, it means that one day you could be accused, and one day you could be the judge.
Yes.
So it prevents power from being long-term in anybody.
Yes.
But it also makes sure that you and the people around you are constantly mixing between what roles you're taking. So you have to think about long-term effects, right? If I will not be fair here, what will happen when the roles reverse? And the same thing happens when you think about the ruling body, and you say maybe the member of parliament change. Maybe it's not every day, maybe they change every week or every month or whatever it is. But if it's frequent, if it's random, right, that's very important, right? Because if it's by election, then you can keep power, and you're concerned with spending your effort on being elected next time. But if it's random, there's nothing you can do, right? Your attention is not going toward making sure you'll be elected again. Your attention is saying, Let me think about the good of the people, because whatever rule I'm creating, I might be later on subjected to that. And that, of course, is reminiscence of Rawls' veil of ignorance, right? When Rawls said, what's a just society? He said a society is just if you would be willing to go into it to a random place. You might be the poorest, you might be the richest, and so on. So in fact, you call this the veil of ignorance because you choose which society you want to move into before you know which role you would play. And randomness does the same thing, because randomness says, if you now dictate a rule, you might be the person that it applies to, you might be the person it's applying to. You have to consider all the possibilities.
Yeah, it has
So they had this.
It really has many effects. One other effect is the people felt much more responsible for their whole society. They had much more the feeling not the state is an abstract administration, far and a kind of an oppression or so. They had the feeling we are the state. This is often said, but the Greeks had the feeling or the experience that they are the state because they had responsibility. So the people felt much more responsible. And they were, if we talk about court, they were very proud that in court, the poor citizen was able to have success against the rich citizens. That was something they were very proud of. And if you look at our systems, I can't talk about other countries because I'm located in Germany, but we have now study after study that shows that before the court, before the law, we don't play with equal weapons. If I, a very wealthy person, I can hire very good lawyers. Yeah. So
let's go back. Let's go back to ancient Greece and not talk about current. So this mechanism of randomness basically says that the ruling society and the citizens are intermixed all the time. You have to have all perspectives. It also means that you don't have these bodies that want to remain in power, parties, and basically it creates a lot of equality. So they run like this, the Greeks, really very, very creative, incredibly creative. And then at some point, that system stops. And then we get representative democracy. And then it's
you forgot the Middle Ages in between.
That's right. I'm skipping on a lot of things, but and then democracy is like, we forget a lot of things about democracy, and at least in the popular representation, democracy is about voting once every 4 years, right? Democracy is changing from participation. The goal is not as clear. Democracy is almost like a value by itself, not as a way to rule, to organize a system, and then people start voting once every X years, and things get worse. So the next question I want to ask you is, what happened? Why did we forget? How did the transition happen from this randomization mechanisms to a representative democracy?
So this is very. If I would answer seriously, I would have to talk now for half an hour at least. So I try to put it short. The first thing is there was some really constitutional failures at that time too. Because, for example, many decisions were made in the so-called ecclesia. This is really all citizens coming together in thousands, and everyone could speak. So rhetoric, like in our times, the internet became very important. And this we don't do this now if we do sortition today, if we do citizens assemblies today. We don't do discussion of hundreds and thousands.
You're jumping on so many topics. Citizen assembly, it's a topic. We'll come back.
But it's really important because we do it different. But this, if you ask me why did it fail in the ancient time, this was one of the reasons. So what really works good is if you draw people in a small group and let them discuss in in a size where conversation is possible. And this is not if you have great rhetoric, great speeches of great men before thousands of people. We experience this right now as well. So this was one thing. The second thing,
what happened is that it just grew too big, right?
No. It was big from the start. It was big from the start. But they had some interesting ideas, but they weren't consequent enough in their institutional. So they had the impression everyone should be involved all the time, and this didn't work out quite well, and motivate some critics of democracy at that time too, in the 4th century before Christ. This is Plato and the critic we know.
So I want you to be more clear.
Okay,
wait. Don't move to second because I don't think you clarified the first one.
Okay.
So the first one, you're saying that people started talking more, like we have these assemblies. Mm-hmm. Like, what was the failure? I'm not clear.
So if they would have done what they did in the Boulé, for example, which prepared the big decisions of the ecclesia, of the whole big thing with thousands of citizens coming together, it would have worked. But the ecclesia didn't work at all and motivated critique of democracy itself at that time. So they experienced the main critique was not always in the public speech, not always the best argument wins. So it addresses the emotions, it addresses not the best in us, to say it short. So public speech is not the way to drive democracy. And they did it partly so and weren't consequent enough. This was one aspect why it failed.
I'm going to ask you again, because again, I'm not...
Okay.
I'm not understanding.
Okay.
So we have these assemblies. Mm-hmm. And when it was running well, people mm-hmm. were deciding, voting, mm-hmm. and so on. And then you say at some point it stops working well.
Yeah.
What stops? What is the change? People start talking for longer. They appeal to. So what changes?
I guess the circumstances changed. So the system remained. It's not true for all the time. It developed in itself, of course, but the key bodies remained. The ecclesia remained. The Boulé, this was drawn by lot, remained. So they had all this.
So the lottery remains, the big assembly remains.
Let's say that the times got tougher, and then the institutional misconceptions had more consequences than from the start. Yeah. So they had to develop their democracy further, but they couldn't at that time. So they had institutional change they couldn't manage. So it was a good idea, but the institutionalization was not consequent enough. When we do it right now, we do it in a different way because we learned from history, of course. But this is only one failure.
No, I understand, but I still don't understand that one failure. I can't let you move because I don't understand it.
Fair for me.
So help me understand, why was it okay for a while? Mm-hmm. And what stopped? What changes? What was the institutional failure? That the same thing we did all the time, mm-hmm. all of a sudden was not as effective.
So as I think it's the circumstances in which this democracy operated, the circumstance is Athens went to war, a civil war with the other Greeks that lasted for 27 years, the so-called Peloponnesian War. And in this war, some weaknesses of this constitution showed up that weren't so relevant before. So the weaknesses were there all the time, but then the times got tougher, the issues got tougher, the political issues. And then what happened is Athens lost the war. It brought up the other Greek states, we would say, the other poleis against them. They lost the war, and this was a big, the idea of democracy was defeated by this loss of the war. This is what happened.
Could it be that the democracy they had before the war was a democracy of money and privilege, and then when resources were constrained, they started fighting more, then the democracy was not strong enough?
To be honest, I'm not quite sure. I couldn't say yes or no. What I see is more what they failed is to expand democracy beyond their small level of the town or state of Athens. So what they should have done, or to avoid the failure or mistake of democracy is to have a kind of mega democracy between the Greek states. So the same principle, sortition, between, and there we have to be fair, with the means they had at that time, it would be really hard to organize such a democracy. We could do this right now with our technological means and our mobility we have right now. They hadn't this at the time. So I think they never came up with the idea to extend the principle of democracy, sortition, over the borders of Athens. So it stayed a national thing. And what happened is that Athens become kind of a tyrant of the other polis. And then the other polis became allies of Sparta and supported Sparta. And then the very strong Athens was defeated. Athens, really, this is also very important. It became strong by democracy. Before democracy, Athens wasn't a superpower in this region, but by democratization, it became a superpower because the citizens were together as one, and then they become very strong. They were very, very big before, but they didn't play any role in what we could say foreign politics with our words today. But then,
so Athens politics is still working for Athens, even though they lost the war. But now they're dealing with other cities, and the democracy is not working across.
Yes, and this loss of the war motivated a lot of critics of democracy. We see this in Plato, we see this in Aristotle, we see this in Thucydides, with authors of the, let's say, 4th and century before Christ and later. And then kind of there was a new thinking, and that was the idea of the wise tyrant, the philosopher king. This was the new idea, and this idea in European history really succeeded whole way. This is the real reason why we hadn't had democracy for, let's say, 2,200 years, because Plato was he had the victory of ideas, kind of. And to be very, very clear, the fathers of our modern constitutions all over the place, in Germany, in France, in the US, they weren't very fond of democracy. They were fond of the idea that the rule of the wise of the chosen few was good for everyone. So when we say
who know how to think,
when you say our modern societies are democracies, we could ask if this is really true right from the beginning, not right now or the last years, because from the start, our so-called founding fathers, they were quite skeptical of the rule of the mob, how they called it. They hadn't had the experience that common people by deliberation could become more wise, more prudent, and this was out of reach because all of them had read Aristotle and Plato, and they were influenced by this idea. Democracy is not so a good idea. They were at the best. They were democracy skepticians who invented our modern constitution, and now we are where we are right now with these constitutions.
Okay, so the Greek original idea fails when it needs to scale up. There's the rise of the philosopher, the person who is clear in their thoughts, and they should be the ones making decisions.
The rational philosopher, the rational guy ruling the city, and we should identify them and then bring them into power, and everything will be fine. This is the idea.
Yeah, and then we come to a modern day democracy, and when you look at modern day democracy, what do you see as the main points of failure right now?
Yeah, I can clearly say this. And it's really quite weird for myself, because really I'm a person without mandate. I'm not a professor or something. I'm just a random guy myself, kind of. But still, I would really say I have the solution.
We talked that random is good.
Yeah, perhaps. We don't know. So I really say we have, or I have, or I'm not alone, but we really have the solution for the problems of our times.
Wait. Don't come to solutions yet. We're slowly. I first want you to tell me what you think of the problem.
Okay, the problem is really the level of political activity. If you have states like we have now, where most of the people stay politically inactive or passive, or like in a consumer mode, or sometimes I say like that we are in our youth. So let's see, between 12 and 18-year-olds. So our position is permanently like this. We know everything better than the adults, like our parents, but we don't have responsibility. So what we do is we critique what politicians do, and they should do this and they should this. Everybody has a different idea, but nobody of us has responsibility. So what we do instead is we don't take responsibility. By elections, we put it away from us. It's like what we do with, we delegate responsibility. So we don't take it. We do as if we would. So I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Germany, it's like you should vote, and election is your duty and kind of stuff. So this is like it works here. But political duty is a good idea, but not done by elections. But you have to go there. You have to invest yourself. You have to be present and show up. So the original idea, and this is what lacks for how I see it, is that we need presence instead of representation. So democracy, if it is democracy, is a system of presence.
Thing you're saying people should participate.
All people.
You say we need participation, and you're saying our participation is very minimal.
Yeah, I have calculated it for Germany, just to say numbers. In Germany, if I'm right, 0.3 to 0.54% of the adult population is politically active, really in responsibility, trying to get elected and taking. So, and this is really a level, we can't call this democracy if so few people do politics, because what democracy really means is every citizen does politics. And this has interesting consequences. One consequence is, for example, populism.
Before we jump to the consequence, you're saying people should participate broadly, and then you're even saying that voting is a very strange way to participate.
Yes.
Because voting for somebody else, I mean, if you voted like in Switzerland on the topics, that will be participation. But if you vote for somebody else, you're actually not acting. You're basically saying somebody else can do this for me. And
it's like we would choose our tyrants for 4 or 5 years. We can choose them, but they're still tyrants. Even if they don't want to be tyrants, structurally they're tyrants.
Yeah, and then of course we have other elements of democracy that comes together with this 4 year of election.
Yes.
Like we need a separation of church and state. We need the court system. We need the separation from the legislators, and so on. To basically, because we give power for 4 years, we need also mechanisms to try and control that.
And I'm not so quite sure if we need them. We are very proud of this. So balance of power between the institutions. I'm not quite sure if we really would need this any longer, if all people would participate really equally. And there's one thing really to make sure from the start, because it's always misunderstood. I give an example. In Germany, we have an organization. It's called, like, if I translate it spontaneously, More Democracy. It's an organization. They work for decades, and they were for a long time big supporters of the ideas of direct referendum. But then they experienced what happened in UK with the Brexit, and then they changed their ideas after this experience. So they learned, and then they had the idea that what we call citizens' assemblies that are drawn by lot, by sortition, or even lottery, is much better, because the people inform themselves first before they give their vote. So it's not like,
they basically, once you look at Brexit, you say maybe the philosopher king is not such a bad idea.
Yeah, this is really a problem, because some ideas that are thought democratic have the opposite effect for the acceptance of democracy. So if we reduce democracy to parties, to referendums, then what we can clearly see what will be the way in the future. More and more people will get skeptical of democracy itself. So my message is, this isn't democracy. Democracy is really where sortition is. Where sortition is democracy and nothing else.
So democracy is not about voting. That's an important thing. Democracy is about real participation and deep participation rather than simply expressing an opinion. So let's go back and talk about these randomly selected groups that I think quite a few people are getting very fond of. So this is kind of going back a little bit to ancient Greece. So describe the mechanism, maybe in one concrete way. Maybe pick one of your favorite examples.
Okay, I have already to choose between, because there are very many examples. One is very famous right now. It's the process in Ireland. They changed their constitution by such a process, so they really trusted the citizens. It was a highly polarized question they had to decide, and I guess
What was the question?
it was the question of same-sex marriage, I guess, and the if I'm not wrong, the right of same-sex couples to adopt children. So Ireland is a Catholic land, so it's an issue for many people, and so the politicians had the feeling.
Let's not call them Catholic, as you probably know. It's a
Oh yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I
it's
have to excuse. I have to excuse.
It's a complex thing, but
it's a complex society, but there is a tradition, let's say.
It's a society where abortion rights were very late, gay rights were very late, and so on.
Yeah.
Very a polarized society on religion from a long time ago, and they want to see what they move forward. So what do they do?
So they draw lots to build our democratic body by ordinary people, by lottery, and
So they take all the citizens.
All the citizens.
They draw.
Everybody could be there. No.
How many do they draw?
I guess it is 250, but I'm not quite sure. I have to look it up to not tell something wrong, but it must be round about
a few hundred people. Those people are being told, you are going to make a recommendation for society.
Yes, and they didn't met only once or twice. They met on several weekends over a long period of time. They had a lot of we would call it interest groups and scientists who shared their opinion, and the citizens deliberated on what they had heard themselves. And they came up with a recommendation to society. And then afterwards, there was a referendum. Yeah. This went quite better than in UK with the Brexit.
Yes, and so the idea here, and this goes back to the importance of true participation, is that they had a very long period to truly educate themselves.
Yeah.
In standard political life, there's a term we call rationally ignorant. And the idea is that if I am a citizen of country X, and there's a topic of whether it's a referendum or whether it's a vote, should I spend a lot of time learning the topic? And the answer is no. By the way, for economists, it's always a puzzle of why people go voting. Because if you go voting, it will take you time and energy and money and petrol and finding parking and so on. And you will certainly not change the result of the election. What are the chances that your vote will change anything? So you will certainly have a cost and you will not have an impact. The probability of impact is so low. So why do people go to vote? But and the idea of rational ignorance is the idea of, if I educate myself, if I now spend 250 hours educating myself on the question of man-made global warming, what impact could I have? And if the impact is tiny, is this the best way to spend 250 hours where I could, in fact, play sports or go work in a garden or something like that? So by having a very large society and diffused responsibility, we basically tell everybody your vote doesn't count, don't focus. But now you're saying, okay, let's pick a small group of people, relatively small, a few hundred, Now everybody has an impact. And we make it easy for them to truly understand the topic, right? So we're teaching them everything that there is to know from all sides and so on. They get exposed like a jury, and at the end of the day, and they get discussion from the outside, they get discussion from the inside, and so on. And then they write the report, and that report basically represents the people. The people have thought about it. And what happened in the example of Ireland?
So they did recommend to move forward, like we would say. So there was really very conservative people in this body, not a few of them. And I would say, if we talk about education, because it really it's important point, I would say people are not so much educated by scientists. This also happens, but the main education is among the citizens itself, because everyone wants to educate the others, but no one of us wants to be educated. So, and if we are on eye level, and the citizens, as citizens, are on eye level, they are in the same range, they can have much more easiness in changing their minds, even much more than elected politicians. If I'm an elected politician, I'm elected for holding my position. If I change my position, I get problems with my voters and my colleagues from my party. But the experience we make, because we had lots of bodies like this by sortition all over the world, in all kind of countries, to all kind of issues, and the regular experience is people modify their opinion. All of us, even people who think, I know what I think about this topic. And if we talk to each other, not we are taught by top-down processes, the big teachers come and tell us what to think, then we are more inclined to think about, especially if we make the experience what we say has an impact on the other, and it becomes a reciprocal process. You change my mind a little bit, I change your mind a little bit, and we feel connected. This is a very important thing we haven't talked about yet. Democracy is also a kind of relationship. The main source I use in my thinking is a German historian. He is called Christian Meyer, and he has to grab what happened in ancient Greek. He made a new term. If I translate it would be called friendship among the citizens. And he really has to create this new term to grab what happened. So the people felt much more connected by the democratic process itself. Totally opposite from right now. From the process that we have right now, people feel divided. They are divided already. And as a result of political process, they feel more divided. In the democracy of ancient times, it was the other way around. People were also divided already, but through the political process, they had the experience that they are not. It's not. I like a word. It's not important for you. It's important for you how my feelings are, what my situation is, and this comes unexpected. So what happens in these bodies right now is people realize the other one, which up to now I thought this is the enemy. He cares about me. He cares, and this is experience from both sides, and this changes something. This changes that people become more inclined to think over their positions. They find new creative solutions nobody would have thought about before this process. So they really come up with creative new ways that just happens in the process.
Yeah. And this is kind of also how you and I got connected, because of this paper I did with Mariano, which basically experimentally show that you can put people together and you create a process by not of voting, but you get a process of deliberation. And in regular society, people defend their position. We are kind of soldiers defending our
good
position.
Soldiers.
That's right. But there's a way to get us to be explorers and want to explore the case. And what we also showed in that paper is that the extreme positions go away. That the extreme position in a regular political discourse are the most pronounced ones. People pay the most attention to them. They're the most salient, crazy, informal kind of flags of
They're
the.
interesting. They're interesting. Extreme positions are always interesting.
That's right. But what we find is that when groups make those collaborative decisions, it's as if the extreme positions are not as if they're discounted. So there's something. So anyway, so when we come back to politics and modern politics, and we want to ask the question of what is the next phase. So we had version 1, ancient Greece. Then we had kind of a long period without democracy. Then we have democracy 2.0. And now when we say democracy 3.0, the first thing you want to bring is those educated, thoughtful, collaborative citizens who would make a lot of decisions for all of us, and not only the politician, right? So it's a body that's supposed to come up with one recommendation rather than fighting. What else? And this of course could work very well in small societies. A city decide if to put a school or a factory. It could work for some things, for like big decisions for society, but it's very unlikely to be enough for everything.
I really think different. I think it's
Okay.
really apt to solve the big issues on a daily basis. This is my true position, and we are really working on this right now. We had so what few people know at the moment. This new, this reinvention of this form is from the 1970s. So since the 1970s, we have new experiments with sortition all over the world. And we had this on a national level in Germany 3 times right now. So we are already experimenting. There are some states in Europe that were
What were the 3? What did the
it
German
was
do?
on climate warming. It was on
What about climate warming?
which measures should we take as a state to climate warming? What were we ready to sacrifice? What should we invent? What should we allow? What should we don't allow? What should be cheaper?
And it
What
was
should
at
be
the level of the state. I know Germany has states. At the level of the state, of the level of whole of Germany.
whole of Germany? But this was a private initiative, but it was supported by official politicians, elected politicians. They
So
supported
one
it.
was what?
Yeah. Then the first official one that was the German Bundestag, the German parliament says we should do this, was about the role of Germany in the world. This was a very high level topic. So the politicians said, okay, whatever the citizens recommend, it's okay. So it was the first, though they were a little bit anxious. So they choose a topic. They could, listen, what maybe there's some idea, but it's not so crucial for us, or it was then. Now it has changed, perhaps. And the third one was about where our food should come from, and about
food security. Should you depend on?
I'm lacking words in this field. Nutrition. I don't know what we should eat and drink, and how the politics around this should be. This was the third one. But the most interesting experiments are in other countries where it's already part of the constitutions. There are some countries that are already taking it not as we do it sometimes if we feel like it, but it's on a regular basis. Some towns do it, and some states do it already. There's a part of Austria, a small state, but they experienced, let's say, 30 or 40 times. They did it 30 or 40 times, and it went quite well. And then they said, okay, it should be part of our constitution because it works. And the part of the world I know where it's the constitutional implementation is the most developed is East Belgium. They have it as a permanent body. And in UK, there is a whole sortition foundation. They're working on the House of Lords should become the House of Citizens. They want to change who sits there. They say House of Lords.
Now that the Queen is dead, they are taking over.
They had the idea before, you have to say. So, and there's big support this is very interesting, from people from the elite itself. One person is George Monbiot. I think his father and mother are part of the Conservative Party, high level. And he just published an article, I think, in the Guardian, And it says general elections are a travesty of democracy. Let's give the people a real voice. So there are more and more people from the official part of nowadays politics who are very open to this idea, at least to experiments, to serious experimenting with it.
So help me understand how it gets integrated. So let's say it's the UK, and let's say there's a question about Brexit, and let's say that we pick 250 people and they write a document with their recommendation and their view. What happens now? Now there's a referendum, or now the politicians get to choose?
There are very different ideas about it. I can tell you mine, and I can tell you what happens in reality. What do you want to hear?
Let's do reality first.
So at the moment, it's quite, it's only on a recommendation level. So it's, especially when politicians have the feeling they can't win or lose with this question. They can't only lose with this question. No matter how they decide, somebody will be very, very angry and they will lose votes. Then they are inclined to do this. So in very crucial fields, there is an openness to.
When they think somebody would always be upset, they're willing to give away the decision so nobody blames them.
Yeah. So they feel uncomfortable of deciding. This happens very often right now, because the problems become more crucial, and most of the time elected politicians are in a lose-lose situation. No matter what they do, they lose.
So you're saying when it's a lose-lose situation, politicians are more likely to say, this process will, whatever it will do, I'll accept.
Yeah, we give it back to the citizens.
Yeah, and when it's not, they usually say, this is a recommendation and then we'll decide.
Yeah.
Or of course it can lead to a referendum. That's a third approach.
Yeah.
Right.
But many people are quite afraid of referendums right now, not only in the UK. For Germany, I can for sure say this.
I think we're also afraid of referendums because we are not trusting our information system.
Yeah, and only it from a very human perspective. I'm a big fan of another advocate of the system. This is the Belgian historian David van Breybroek, and he says it's not very fair to ask somebody who comes home tired from work. The kids have some problems, and then you get a call from an opinion poll. What do you think about foreign politics? What do you think? And you are so, okay. So you are not ready to answer because you have so many other topics in your life you are concerned with. So what you call the please tell me again, the rational ignorance. So it's just a question of do I have the time? Do I have the attention to go to all the political issues we have today? Most of the people don't have the time to spend time with this. And nevertheless, there are opinion polls that ask what we think. And he says, David van Breybroek says, opinion polls ask us what we think when we don't think. We don't have the time to think. And these citizens' assemblies give us time to think and to deliberate with each other. And often we are not conscious of what we think there's a good idea, what we should do, but we are not conscious what this has consequences for other citizens that are in totally different situations from where we are.
Yeah. So that's also very different, right? Because when we vote, we just think about what's good for us, and when people are in these groups of 250,
we really underestimate the grade of differentiation of society all over the world right now. So we live already in divided societies. Your private environment is not my private environment. My issues are not your issues. We have different resources, we have different experiences, different situations, and of course different values. It can't be other than that. But we underestimate. We still, in our brains, it's like we already live in a small society and everything is quite common for everybody. But this is not our real situation. We really live in different worlds. And in this randomly selected bodies, I would say, for the first time, society meets itself. And it's a big surprise for everyone. For example, I'll give you an example. when you ask in Germany, the people, are you part of the middle class? Most of the people think they are part of the middle class, even very, very rich people. And they think it themselves. They don't fake it. They think it themselves. They say, because the people around them are similar wealthy as they are, because they live in such neighborhoods and so on. And also not the same grade, but also many people from the working class think also they are a part of the middle class of society. But when they meet each other in randomly selected bodies, they realize how different their situation is for the first time, because they are confronted with each other with their totally different situations.
Yeah, it just strikes me that another interesting thing is that whether people are myopic or when they think long term. And I think that when people are, like, you ask me, what do I want? I say, what do I want right now? But when I get to this assembly, I'm thinking about what is good for the country long term, right? It's a very different perspective. So you said that practically, sometimes politicians say, I don't want this mess, you decide. Sometimes they say, you will make a recommendation. It's almost never referendums. But what would you do if you were in charge? How would you use those mechanisms? By the way, what's the name of these mechanisms when people get together?
What do you think? Citizens Assembly or what do you?
Citizen assemblies.
Citizens assemblies, yeah, drawn by law.
And so how would you use citizen assembly if it was up to you?
I would use it in every law change or law giving process, and I would make it a kind of a board above every elected politician. So if you have, for example, the Minister of Economy or Minister of Foreign Affairs, or say, there's always a body of people who are drawn by lot. They come together each time different people, let's say half a year or quarter a year, and they look over how did the politician do his job. And then that's thumbs up, thumbs down, not killing, of course, but is he allowed to rest in his office? And then what we get is the following thing. Some of the elected politicians will be in their office for decades, because sorted, how do you say, sorted? Lotteries. Lottery after lottery says, good work, good work, good work. And some elected politicians...
Assembly after assembly.
Assembly after assembly. And some elected politicians will only have 3 months in their office, because after 3 months, the citizens itself are not convinced that this is a good idea. And this changes what parties are. We don't have to say we don't have parties. Parties can stay, but their role changes. It's like they have candidates. We elect them, as we do right now, but it's more, we don't elect parties, we elect persons. Then personal competence will play a much bigger role. And then after the Citizens Assembly has said, thumbs down, we please go, then we elect the office new. So it's not 4 years and 5 years. So it's quarter a year, half a year, where we look over it. And this is a way that is quite similar to what Athens did in the ancient time. This is quite, from my analysis, what I have seen, very, very close to how democracy worked in his original version.
So let's say we pick party X, and then we don't like the Minister of Finance.
Yeah.
Party X gets to...
No, it's drawn you. The parties can make candidates. Every party can say, okay, we have our candidate, and then we elect them, personal election for this office, and then, but the real control is in the hands of Citizens Assembly. So my proposal for modern societies is give real power to citizens assemblies. Don't let them just be counseling or giving advice. Give them power, give real power to all of us. And one additional thing is very important. I'm not talking about a society where this happens very seldom or very rare. I'm talking about a society where every one of us, every citizen, every adult person does this several times a year. So we all have to spend some weekend at political conventions where we would like to spend our time different with our children or our business or our grandfather and grandmother. So we all have to sacrifice something. This has to be said as well, because democracy can't come without costs. Yeah,
without
it costs us.
But this assemblies. So you now have two types of assemblies. You have assemblies for topics, and then you have assemblies that are above a minister.
They are control assemblies, like in economy, like in companies. But the board is by citizens.
And would you have these assemblies, because it's also different, because the assemblies on a topic get together for one topic and then they get away, and the assemblies for controlling a minister are staying for 6 months or so? What?
No, they don't just come together to look over the work of the politician for the last 3 or 6 months. They look over it and says good work or bad work. That's their job.
So they also get assembled, like it's assembly in this, but there are two types of them.
Yeah, minimum. I could think of more of them for even for other purposes.
Yeah. Okay. What is a weakness of your proposed system? Aside from the time-consuming thing, which I think has time-consuming, which is both good and bad. People would, as
none.
You said,
there really is none. I have to be.
People would meet people from other parts of society. We will know each other better. We will think. We will be more participatory. And so I can see lots of good things, right? Even the time consumption. Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad activity.
But it's a big issue. It's really a big issue. Economically, for example, it's a big issue, because there are people who have to spend 60 or 70 hours a week to get their business started. And if the call of duty comes, so you are drawn by lot, it's your duty to go there, because you're a citizen, you're an adult person, you have to take responsibility. So this is not a small issue, this is the big issue, but it's the only issue. I'll give you an example of a common doubt usually that comes up. This is for the impact of science. And the experience really is, and I can say this because I know very, very many scientists that are really in despair right now, who try to do counseling of politicians at the moment. I know such people since 20 years, and they always make the same experience. They are sometimes invited, the politicians, the elected politicians from the party, listen to them. Often even they understand what the scientists say, but afterwards the party dynamic comes in. So they are really in despair. And the experience in...
Tell me a bit more. Why are they in despair?
They make the experience in real politics, in everyday politics, their counseling has no impact at all at the moment.
Give me an example. Give me an example of what a scientist... I mean, I have an idea of what you're talking about. I just want you to be a bit...
To be personal, my own teachers at university did that. They went to Berlin and they came back, and they could really, you can see it from their body language. It was really, they had very good ideas. I can't tell you this idea or that idea, but they made the experience. Politicians listened, and then they went on as if there had nothing happened. This is a constant experience.
What you're saying is that there's a scientifically good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's in biology, maybe it's in political science, maybe it's about reducing bureaucracy. And the scientists have a lot of proof that this would be really good for society. Maybe this is a good thing to do in education. Maybe it's a good thing to change in healthcare reform.
Yes.
And there's evidence. There's good evidence that you can trust, and everybody agrees that you can trust it. But then nothing is enacted.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, there is no problem at all between democracy and science. If you do democracy right with citizens' assemblies, the impact of science doesn't decrease, it increases, because citizens, when they have time, are much more capable and open to let science have impact on their thoughts than politicians can do. It's not the failure of the politicians. That's not because they're silly or so, but they are in a system of dilemma structures. They can't be open, because if they would be open, they would lose elections. They wouldn't get.
I think that what you're saying is that assemblies have a better path for information to reach the final conclusion, because there's nothing that is constraining it. There's a process that takes data and information and so on, and science is one part of the information, and it just builds up into a recommendation. Whereas the political system, because it's give and take, because it's multiple systems, because it's about being elected, because it's posturing, because it's ideology, political identity politics, and so on, has a lot of barriers for information. And you say you want that system to be more pure, and we're learning more things, and we have to do it. I will ask you once again to see whether you can think about a disadvantage for the system.
Really, I think about this about 8 years, and I'm a very skeptic for my personal. I'm a skepticist, and I don't find any disadvantage beyond the time-consuming thing for us all, and this is a big issue for me. I really wonder, for example, can our economies work? Because you have to think about, in a system where every one of us can randomly be put out his private world, suddenly nobody can plan it. It would have another impact. Every one of us would be more. There has to be somebody else that can do your job when you are not there. Let's say, think about a mother with 4 children, and she's a really important person for them. But if the duty calls, she has to go to the political assembly. Then she is lacking in the family. The family is missing her. Then our private systems really had to change. The same in companies. There are some persons in companies where you have the feeling, if this person is not there, the whole company will collapse. So something will change in our private worlds. And I'd say companies are part of our private worlds. Yeah, this is my language is. So I see.
Very good.
So,
but what is very clear is that our current democracy is not going that well.
No, and I guess nobody thinks so. And it's frightening what ideas come right now. There's an article from our Minister of how do you say, Justice, or I don't know, so Marco Buschmann is its name. And his idea is, because he's now, there's fear that our populist party in Germany, it's the so-called AfD, will win elections right now. There are 3 elections coming, and they will win the elections. And then now the politicians are in fear, and their idea is the courts should be stronger. Yeah. So as a kind of wall for populism. And what I see is, when populists are in power,
as politicians are getting stronger and stronger, the reaction is to get the courts stronger and stronger. And but that gets people, in your language, to be even less participatory, right? And it's just a fight between those. Let's. Who do you think is going to be the first country?
I guess it will be a small country. It will be a small country like Austria or Belgium, relatively small, of course.
Yeah.
But I would be very surprised if a country like France, Germany, or the US would be. Also, I think it is the US that needs it the most, because still, from my perspective, I'm Germany based. It's like you are ahead in your development, let's say 10, 20 or 30 years. The problems you have right now, we will have in some decades. This is what I see. You're just a little bit ahead of us. And the polarization so the feeling the political opponent is not an opponent, but he's an enemy, and he must be defeated. So I call it the Star Warsification of politics. And this is the funny thing. This is what the Greeks had before they had democracy. This was the problem they faced with. They were sick of it. They wouldn't ever have invented and implemented democracy if they hadn't had constant kind of civil war for, let's say, 100 years. They were not friendly people. They were not idealists. They had weapons. They were used to violence. But this was the reason why they get in problems. And this was the reason why they realized we need democracy. Otherwise, we won't be happy with each other never again. So it was an act of despair, kind of. They used ethics, they used religion, they used any kind of idea, but nothing worked. And after nothing has worked, then they implemented democracy.
So let's hope that we will wise up and get to democracy 3.0, connected to democracy 1.0 before it's too late.
I hope so.
Ardalan, thank you so much for the time and attention. And maybe we'll repeat this again when we talk more specifics about some examples from successful assemblies. Thank you so much.
Thank you too, and you're welcome with this idea.